to the communities, and that is what then makes legal aid to be at the very heart of this entire exercise. Of course, we then had Teresa Mugaza from IDLO reminding us of the significance of having institutions that work in this area and facilitate the realization of the set goals. We then had the iconic keynote presentation by Professor Mbote, which you remember took us through several historical and landmark decisions such as the Rio Conference. You remember her talking about the Rio? You remember her talking about distributive justice, about procedural justice, and many other critical things that have happened in different parts of the world, the Aarhus, the Paris, and of course Kyoto. And I believe that then did introduce us to what we are now very familiar with, the polycrisis. After that, you will remember that we had our very good friend, Professor Gudrun Zegel, who talked to us about what is happening in Europe. How many of you remember the 3 cases that she talked about from France and from Portugal? And of course, we all remember that those were actually meant to tell us that things are happening in Europe. And I was amazed, Professor, at the level of activity in that particular court, and I particularly did understand when we were then grappling with the question of locus standi. And I think it is it Dr. Miyawa who then brought to our attention the very old decision in Anna Rita Karimi, the 1979 Anna Rita Karimi case, in which Justice Hancock and Trevelyan, those of you will remember, said that in matters constitution, you must be very precise in definition of what constitutional rights are under threat. And Wambua Kituku, who is an old hand in this regard, of course, talked about the judicial responses. And then we had Miyawa Maxwell take us through environmental justice, as indeed we then have, was it Simon Kamau who bedazzled that with some equation in economics, and I'm told he's undertaking an undergraduate degree in economics. So this was an attempt at also practicing his economics honors. And then of course we had Ogendi, and Ogendi did introduce something that I think ought to be very alive in our minds today. What is artificial intelligence? Perhaps that is the one thing that we have not wrapped our minds around as intimately as we should. But going forward, how is artificial intelligence going to be significant in the area of climate change? And remember, we reminded ourselves that if you look at critical areas, and it is Professor Kamori Mbote who talked about this thing that we are fond of, about transition. And you know now, it is the buzzword, particularly in this part of the world, we talk about transitioning from fossil fuel. And Ethiopia has now banned the importation of cars that are powered with fossil fuel. They are saying they are going all electric, and we threw the spanner in the works by asking all these lithium batteries and all, where are you going to throw them? And I think it is you, Professor Scott, that talked about dump sites, and I hope that you are going to engage with that particular issue a lot more intimately. What are we doing with our dump sites, the disposal of solid waste and non-solid waste? And then, of course, we had my good friend Evan Sogada talking about culture. What is the place of culture, and what one may describe as bush science, the science that we interact with on a daily basis. And Gilbert also did engage us in a very unique way, not being a lawyer. And I think this is what tells us the interconnectedness of disciplines when we talk about climate change. So in a nutshell, those are some of the things that emerged yesterday. But it would be proper if I were to hear for the next 5 minutes some of the takeaways from yesterday's deliberation from the floor in any manner that you please before I start picking people to say things. Please. And the mic can circulate, or if you can project, but I believe, could you kindly, you can use mine as I.
Thank you. It was such a rich day, so much was going on, much to remember. But the key takeaway for me was engaging with local people and bringing local people into rooms like this. I think 3 participants mentioned that. And alongside of that, having youth involved and women involved from the grassroots in conferences like this.
We must remember, and I believe that that is one of the remits that follow-up is involved with. Women, youth, communities. You are reminded of the Ilchamus case. The good Justice Angote, who is already engaged and tells me that he has almost 52 judges in his division. How are they going to deal with these issues? What is the role of science in this area? Because we are quick to say it is an act of God, but is it an act of God? Or there is science that can demonstrate. So I think that is a very important. How do you involve communities? Once we have congregated here preaching to ourselves, how is this gospel going down to the communities? And will the communities be the richer because we assembled here? And remember, we also were taken through the 296-page handbook, which in a manner of speaking is going to be the tool that will be used at different levels. The judges will consume it in its full splendor, but the communities will want to have it broken down into consumable capsules. How are we going to be useful to them in that regard? Any other takeaway? Please.
Morning. Good morning. I'm Andrew. I took 3 items. Number 1, environmental justice is an evolving concept. 2, 1 billion children are extremely at high risk. And the last one, climate change affects the most vulnerable in the society.
For itself in terms of vulnerable communities, and that I think is very critical, state responsibility, and I think the good professor talked about that. What is the state responsibility? I noted, of course, when you talked about, was it the Duarte case, and the case of the 3 70-year-old ladies in Switzerland. You said that somebody you met was rather annoyed with the decision. You didn't tell us why they were annoyed. I would want to hear why it is that they were very... The Duarte case, I could understand that if you begin to say that activities in 32 countries in Europe, we in Africa will also say your activities in Europe are the ones that have been affecting us all the years. So there would be no limit, as it were. But I would want to hear what really caused the anger.
Yeah, well, Switzerland in this case, of course, is thinking that they are, well, they are one of the richer countries in Europe, and they are trying to do their best, as I guess every country tries to do. But apparently from a distance, it was not like that. So for instance, they promised to reduce greenhouse gases by 2030 to up to 35%. Germany, for instance, promised to do that up to 65%. Yeah, so the targets they have, first of all, they didn't really set targets. That's what the court said. And second, they didn't really say which sector in the economy should reduce how much. So it was not very clear. They have missed their goals in the past, but of course they thought that they are kind of at the forefront of doing effective climate protection. Thank you.
There are two things that continue to, and they're almost becoming buzzwords, which we use with abject abandon, but we don't understand. Perhaps we could break them down. You know, carbon credit, all of us are being told you can benefit from this, but if you ask people what it is, people are not likely to tell you beyond saying carbon credit. And then Professor Mbote also talked about polycrisis. And these are things that look and roll out of the tongue very beautifully. But what are they? Somebody who will want to tell us how they understood those things. I think the carbon credit, Kituk Wambua talked about it, polycrisis, and we know that we have these COPs that are taking place. The next one is the next month in Baku, or is in December in Baku in Azerbaijan. Are they becoming annual jamborees at which we just meet and wait for the next one? Any takeaway from those, or any other thing that you think you ought to? Nothing to take away, Scott? Polycrisis. There's a young gentleman, please.
Good morning. In my understanding, a polycrisis is where you have, first of all, we talk about the triple planetary crisis: climate change, biodiversity, and nature loss, and also pollution. And when then there are other crises, for example, that we would say exacerbate, but increase or compound these environmental crises, then we're talking about the polycrisis. So when you add, for example, factors like poverty or factors like race and other ways in which certain communities might be disadvantaged, economic pressures, then these compound the existing crisis into a polycrisis. So it's polycrisis, meaning that there are many crises in the same thing, impacting the same population. Then on carbon credits, my understanding is that in the Paris Agreement, there are, and also previously in the Kyoto Protocol, but specifically in the Paris Agreement, you have certain projects that can be brought by a country where they remove carbon from the atmosphere. So these greenhouse gases, which now are produced by different industries and are put into the atmosphere, certain projects can remove that carbon from that atmosphere. Now, 1 unit being 1 ton of that carbon that is in the atmosphere, when it is removed, can also be traded on a market. And those carbon credits are what monetarily we would attribute to that 1 ton. So saying that if I remove 1 ton, you'll pay me X amount. So that credit then you can trade, where the more carbon that you remove, the more credits you earn. And then a company, for example, that is still increasing their greenhouse gas emissions can pay you that money, because then it will compensate for the emissions that they have from their companies. So that's my understanding of that.
The takeaway, but there's something that I think is Kamau who talked about green tax and commercial banks. Did anybody quite get the gist of that? Because I think because of the pressure on time, he did not quite have the time to explain it to us, we who are not initiated. But he was talking about green tax, banks, commercial banks, and profitability. Does anybody want to say something about the understanding of that? And as you think about this gentrification that we talked about and affordable housing in Kenya, do you fear that that is going to be the impact? Because if you go to Nairobi now, you see some of these affordable housing, they are moving into spaces. Your lower middle class and middle class are moving into the areas that were. Anybody? Because we have only 3 minutes. Yes, Professor?
Okay, thank you. I think I liked the presentation by the gentleman who presented on tax and banking, and the message that I took out of it is that with such studies, we can be able to get evidence of the taxing regimes and how they impact on investment. Will it be green investment or otherwise? And then this can be used by the investor or anybody who needs to make a petition to make their case, so that somebody can easily point out and say that due to a tax regime that was introduced, I've been able to make a loss in my investment in green energy and or in a green project, and therefore I'm aggrieved because this was the pronouncement through maybe a bill in Parliament that turns into law that requires us to have green investments, but I've invested and the econometric justification makes me feel aggrieved because I've made a loss. So I think it's a scientific way we can provide evidence for either investing and promoting such investment or trying to get reprieve where we get aggravated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two terms emerged yesterday, not one of them perhaps not emerged, but were used in terms, first of all, I think it was Professor Zagel who talked about the exhaustion of local remedies. But within the East African region, if you are talking about the Mara Basin, for example, which transcends into Tanzania, what is local jurisdiction? If I'm in Kenya and the thing goes through to Tanzania, and in the context of East African community, what will we consider to be local exhaustion of local remedies? I want us to think about that. And then something that I think was raised by, was it Miawa? I think it's Dr. Miawa who talked about our understanding of functus officio. Because courts tend to say, I've delivered the judgment. What happens after the judgment is not my concern. Should we have a system where functus officio is actually defined or redefined to mean after you have ensured your judgment is implemented? What do you think as you raise other issues? You have 2 minutes. Any other issue apart from the ones that are flagged?
Prof.
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm the one who made the...
Oh, you are the one who made that?
Yes, that presentation on green taxes. And I think the... I think the main discussion that we should be looking forward to is whether you see now these taxes mostly are implemented from the developed countries. So the question is that whether those taxes are really implementable in developed countries, or in developing countries like in Africa. So at the moment, I think what we are trying to look at is whether these taxes are going to affect corporates in a negative way compared to what they would be expected to affect those developed countries. As I was doing the presentation, mostly like what I was saying, institutions in developed countries are where like regulatory institutions are strong, but in developing countries, they are weak regulatory institutions. And in such, you'd expect that with green taxes, we may not get what we expect their impact to be. So the discussion should be on future on whether we should adopt those taxes as they are implemented in developed countries, or we should come up with our own ways of trying to mitigate climate change.
Just about, and one of the things, and Professor Mbote, I would want to hear this from you. As we are talking about Kenya, we have a handbook that has now been developed in Kenya. As we give practical meaning to integration in the East African region, isn't there a sense in harmonization And you who is now sitting at a vantage point, one may say, you start with the East African region, harmonize at that level, go to West Africa, harmonize at that level, SADC and all, and then you can then talk about what can be described as an African approach. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Thank you very much. Yes, I do see it at the vantage point, but my vantage point may even be removed from Africa, because as a director of the Law Division, my role is to see growth of the environmental rule of law globally. So I am looking now at Kenya, Africa, but I am also looking at what's happening in Asia, what is happening in Latin America, what's happening in Europe. But because I have been in this space, I know that the East African community has had a very strong sense of bringing laws together. And it's not that difficult here, because the core of the East African community, our legal traditions are by and large the same, and we copy each other a lot when it comes to laws. I also know that in Africa, yesterday when I was talking, I said, you know, we forget that the first human rights treaty that recognized the right to a to a satisfactory environment is actually the African Charter. And I think that has to count for something. Not too long ago, I was at a meeting of the 3 courts, the ECOWAS Court, the African Human Rights and People's Court, and also the East African Court of Justice. And they are very, very committed to coming together. They're very committed to coming together to build on this environmental rule of law and to ensure that they don't get left behind. There's a lot of capacity building. And I think here, in this region, there is a lot more awareness. What probably we need to ramp up more is the implementation enforcement. And if you look at, okay, you have all these laws, why is our environment the way it is? And that implementation gap is what we really need to talk about.
So I think we end with that wrap-up session. Professor Zagel, as we were having breakfast, I told you that in this part of the world, there is no shortage of laws, most of which we honor in breach. So what we are being encouraged to do is to implementation, and I think that also will require funding, which I think is critical. Thank you very much. We may now segue into the next session.
Thank you so much, Professor PLO, for that recap. You asked people to reflect on what they picked from the poly-crisis. My understanding of the poly-crisis, Professor PLO Lumumba, is what is usually summarized by Chinua Achebe as situations or scenarios that are pregnant and nursing a child at the same time. I'm sure you, I'm sure you understand that statement. Eh? All right, kindly, we would like to make this announcement that if you are leaving today, we request that you check out by 10 a.m. Please, if you are leaving today, we request that you check out by 10 a.m. Allow me to also recognize the presence of Professor Wilkista Muturi, one of our senior colleagues from Egerton University, who is the Dean, Faculty of Environment and Resource Development, FAD. In other words, the Faculty of Environment is very wholly represented because we have the former Dean and now the current Dean. The former Dean is Professor Gilbert Oboere. Allow me to also recognize the presence of, we have Ms. Christine Agemba, the chairperson, Kenya Law Reform Commission, who joined us today. It's just She has just walked out, but she's with us, and she has also been working with us in the previous conferences. So we appreciate her presence this morning. And now I am going to invite my colleague Macharia to take us through the next session. He will see how we will keep on, stitching from, yesterday's program, what we didn't finish, and what we need to pick up from today's program. Karibu sana Macharia.
Good morning. It's good to see you again, bright and ready for the day. It's good that we started on time, so we give colleagues and participants enough time to ventilate their arguments and responses and reviews thereafter. It's good that we started on time, so we give people enough time to make their presentations and reviews thereafter. Now, we're going to do a bit of alteration of our program as we wait colleagues to walk in and as we warm up for the day. We're going to have a session moderated by Professor Patricia Mbote on beyond formal law, role of religion, customs and ethics, beliefs and values in securing climate and environmental justice. We'll have two presenters, Dr. Wamwara, Dean Wamwara and Eric Masafu, and I believe they are ready. If you are, I would start with Dean Wamwara. If you please could. Okay, we will sort it out just now. Present first and then. Of course.
You know, beyond formal law is something that almost became synonymous with myself, because for those people who are Kenyans, you remember that I defended a higher doctorate. And what people saw was a big book. But that big book, I think at the core of that, and my higher doctorate was struggling with the fact that we have different laws. You know, we have plural legal systems. Even as we are talking here about multilateral environmental agreements, about environmental laws, at the end of the day, the environment lives with people. So the norms and legal realities that people live with are the ones that determine how they use the environment. And you see those norms, they could be religion. I think Wamwara will be talking about religion. And I'll give you an example before I hand over to him. You know, somebody was talking about those from Kenya know the Shakahola tragedy. That when people were being told by a man of God to fast and basically not eat, even as he was eating. So the magistrate decided to tell the people that they must eat. And despite putting goodies, food in front of them, they would not eat. And the question was, which law were they? You know, they were disobeying the magistrate, but obeying definitely a higher law or legal reality. So you have the floor, Dr. Omwara.
Thank you, Prof, for a very good introduction to what I want to talk about. And I think it is easier to make people do things if you tell them, God has said. And today we want to look at, for God and for posterity, religions have a message on environment. What is that message? And how can we, as environmentalists and defenders, unite those interests to serve a particular whole? Next. I just want to look at, I've identified only three major religions in Kenya. African traditional religions, because it is particular to nations, and then of course Christianity and Islam. And then I'm wondering, is there a possibility that we can join hands? And then what lessons can be learned from religion, and what can be changed, what must change? Not everything, just as Professor Lumumba told us yesterday. A lot of times we look at traditions as what used to happen, but it happens every day. And not everything that was traditional is great. So then what can change, what must change? And then I will conclude. Next. Now, to understand what happens, then we must also understand the cosmology of African traditional religions, if we start with it. And there are three stages of life. Number one, we must have birth, marriage, and then death. And those may not be an end in themselves or a beginning in themselves, because there is an existence of people, they are unborn. Even before people, even before you are, you exist as in a form of the unborn, and you might be in God or in the loins of your parents, but you are there. And then once you are born, there's a stage called marriage. We thank God if you are not a member of ATR, but if for the unmarried here, if you chose not to marry, they would even marry for you because you had to marry. And then you had to give birth. If you had problems, African traditional religion had ways of ensuring everyone had a child, even if it means women marrying women or men being helped to get children. But at least everyone had to have a child. And then, of course, you had to die. It's a reality they lived with and, in fact, celebrated in many ways. And then you must die so that you create room for the unborn. If you continue then. So then there's a circle of life, and there's no end to life. Life begins with God, and there's nowhere people are supposed to go to. You know, I'll tell you how Christianity tells us how we are preparing for the new heaven and the new earth. The old heaven and the old earth will go away. No, in African traditional religion, we are here forever. And this is how it is. Life begins with God. It becomes the unborn, and then they are the living dead. After the living dead have lived for a long time, or they have gone and past our memories, they become ancestors, and they have power over the living in many ways. And ancestors that eventually become spirits, and then the spirits, divinities, and finally back to God. Life was that circle. And therefore then, in their approach to conserving the environment, they had that reality, that the earth is for us, it is for our kids, it's for our kids' kids, and it's also for even those who will never know our names. Okay? If you continue then. And therefore then, all we have is the universe. If you are the living, you live in this realm. And therefore what they do to you is they give you a right to habitation. You have a right to live in places, and a right to livelihood, exploration of the natural environment. And everyone, you have only a right to access. Absolute ownership as we know it in our systems is not there. You access as you need. When that need ceases, you let it go and it goes back to the community. And then, of course, there are very serious places of worship that no one could go to. If you are Luo or Kikuyu, you remember there are these sacred forests that no one was supposed to go to. Okay? And then they have shrines and places of worship only accessible to a few. Then there were also different forests, and they had a purpose. And then, of course, we had to, by the way, even amongst my people, even the act of breaking the ground is an act of worship, because you are going against nature. And therefore, before you break the ground, there are prayers you have to make, including very interesting prayers. Because you are telling them that we are going against you, but this is important, and that's why we have to do it. And there's so much that went around this. And then if you continue then, I want to ask you to remember that the African outside, the setting of the land and the environment is lost. Do you remember the two cases of the Enderois and the Ogiek communities? You remember the issue along the Baringo, Lake Baringo area, and also the Mau forest? We are here because we cannot understand ourselves outside of who we are. We cannot understand ourselves outside of our land and the things that we hold dear to ourselves. If you read John S. Mbiti, he says this, that the African is tied to the land because it gives him a sense of being. It connects him, the Zamani, which is the past, the Sasa, which is now, and I dare add, the future, which is the Badai, which is the future. So all these three aspects of being are expressed in land and the natural environment. And therefore then, I want us to remember that in African traditional religion, the place of environment was so important. By the way, I'll tell you this story about my people, for example. Even the lighting of matches, kwamba you just start a fire, it was very highly looked upon. In fact, they gave life to even the inanimate, living attributes, even the inanimate. For example, a house had a personality and a life. And to commit arson was as worse as committing murder. Some of these things that we did to, and we still do, by the way, some of these things we speak in the past, but a lot of these things, if you are from the village like I am, a lot of these things still influence what we do and how we do what we do. If you continue. And then, of course, now we come to Christianity. And there's so many Christian verses that talk about environmental conservation. But I'll begin with the beginning, the very beginning and the very end of the Bible. And in the very beginning, you have a command to what? Replenish. Replenish. You know? And then before then you subdue. You replenish and then subdue the earth. Then you have dominion over everything that's everything that's around. And then in Genesis, in Revelation, I want you to look at the very last part. God is coming, and when he's coming, he's saying he is coming to reward his servants, the prophets, the saints, Saint Lumumba included, those who fear his name, both important and unimportant. But one of the things he's coming with is not just reward, but also recompense for those who destroy the what? The earth. So if you are a polluter, if you are all these people who don't kill or whatever, do anything. If you are if you litter the earth, you're not going anywhere. So I want to ask that you remember that we have a duty for this earth and now. Continue. And then, of course, Christianity continued. It says, be fruitful and multiply. And then, of course, I'll finish by saying, anyone who is a polluter, anyone who impoverishes the earth, anyone who uses it as it should not be, I want to ask those who do not know Kiswahili, every one of us, let us just learn this Kiswahili, go back with it and say, when I was in Kenya, I learned this Kiswahili word. And this Kiswahili is, unaenda wapi? Can we say, unaenda wapi? Unaenda wapi? If you think that the new heaven and the new earth is for you, you who pollutes and destroys the earth, then I'm telling you there's no way you're going. Let's go to Islam, and I know my time is running. Now, in the Quran, there are so many passages or verses talking about how we are supposed to what? To protect the environment. For example, if we eat and drink, we have access to the natural environment, but let us not waste, because the Lord does not like the wasteful. In the next 2 years, he's telling us that we have a duty to not abuse the earth. We have a duty not to spread corruption. We have a duty to protect the birds and the animals and everything that is in earth. If you continue, and the next one on Islam as well, he said, I am going to, it also says, has the same command as is found in Genesis, that we have an authority over, the human as the authority over the earth, and therefore then we have a responsibility to take care of the earth as well. Okay? And then you continue, and then we come to the next one now. Now, those who are, by the way, Kenyans are very religious, and you could see it when we had a debate in the Senate regarding impeachment. Every senator, that last evening before they voted, everyone, even the Muslims, first quoted the Bible, the Bible then quoted the Quran. You see how religious we are, even in the highest places of that we make decisions. So we have, religion is a foundation upon which most of us are doing whatever we do. And those who follow this religion will listen to this thing when you tell them that the Lord has said. They can be told to do so many things, including to do very interesting things, abhorrent even. Why don't we use this opportunity to go to the software of what makes the African, the Kenyan, to make them do good? And that's why, if we let's go to the next one. That's why this is what I am saying. I'm asking, for example, are there certain things that we have done or that we do that are there lessons we can learn from what? From the religion. For example, we had all this mukure. Some can mzee soma hiyo ya kwanza. Kama unaelewa. Nani anaelewa? Mukuru? Mukuru wa Nyathanga or Gotramogi or Entim Naimina and Kio or Kaya Forest. But I'm glad that Masafu is going to deal with all these cultural shrines and places of worship. And then we must understand that we can mainstream natural environment conservation into religious messaging. It is possible, and it's important. By the way, it is important. If you tell a person that do not litter because if you litter, you'll not go to heaven, I think they'll not do it. They'll most likely not do it. And then we must also work to empower religious organizations and use religious conviction to ensure that people work towards environmental conservation and climate justice. And therefore, are there certain things that we used to do that we can stop doing as a people? And maybe that's what I hope you will help me get a few more pointers as to some of the religious practices amongst your nations or amongst your religions that I could include as certain things that we may stop. For example, amongst the Luo, this is every Luo man who has grown to be a man, if he wants to be completely whole, you must leave your father's home to start your own home. It's called Goyodala. It's a very important part. Oh, by the way, it's a very important part of being. But what happens is you must leave your home. In the era when we have land is no longer there, must that continue? Must that continue? And then what other religious practices that we can learn from? And then finally, I want to ask that now in my conclusion, I want to ask that next, in my conclusion, this is A summary of a proposal I hope to submit to Professor Kamerin Votia and her team, that we need a curriculum, especially if you want change. And we are talking about changing how people do things. And it can only happen if we change the things we believe in. And we can do that when, for example, from the pulpit, an environmental conservation message goes into the messaging by religionists and religious leaders. And of course, the fear of God and the responsibility for posterity would move more Kenyans towards environmental conservation and economic justice than anything, including even laws. Thank you very much, and I stop there. Thank you.
Yes, good morning once again. I'm going to talk about the effect of climate change on cultural heritage sites, environmental regulation and adaptation. This is a paper that I'm doing jointly with Dr. Agnes Meroka and Professor Collins Odote. Yes, so we'll start. So, straight on to the introduction. Cultural heritage sites, just move on to the next slides, are important in our country, important for the community. They serve various purposes. Of course, a huge source of income, livelihoods for many people and so forth. For this particular paper, we were looking at the site, the Great Lakes system. So these are Lake Bogoria, Lake Nakuru, and Elementaita, especially the ones which have been witnessing the major flooding disasters. So take, for instance, Lake Nakuru. This is what happens when we have floods. So, of course, because of the rising water levels, you've seen so much being washed away, biodiversity, livelihoods, and so forth. So, in a nutshell, we are looking into how cultural heritage, as much as it's vulnerable to impacts of climate change, can as well be used as a resource to ensure that there is some form of resilience or adaptation. Yes, next slide, Anita. So of course, as I said, Kenya has several cultural heritage sites that have been inscribed in the World Heritage List. So you have Fort Jesus, you have Lamu, the Great Lakes system, you have the Kaya forests up there, and there are 7 of them. So as I said, we are looking into the Great Lakes system. So the paper essentially looks at an overview of heritage, its various dimensions. It could be either tangible or intangible. So there are various dimensions that could be looked into it. The influence, that's the impact of the surrounding on the nearby communities. Of course, it will be influenced or affected by the various forms that it will take place. Anita. So the impacts that can be witnessed, the common ones, of course, would be the rise in sea levels. You could have in some places degradation of permafrost, that is ice melting, in short, desertification and soil degradation. But for our case now, the first impact is important, that rise in sea level. You could witness windstorms. If it's in the coast, there's an increase in humidity and arid conditions, or there is loss of biodiversity. So for our case, the major impacts that are being witnessed is loss of biodiversity and the issue of the rise in sea levels, which has a ripple effect on many other things. Next slide. So I take a look into the legal framework that is in existence. So you have the World Heritage Convention at the international level. Then in Kenya, we have a national policy and legal framework on cultural heritage. We have the Constitution, which and Articles 11, 40, and 69. Then we have domesticated some law, the Protection of Traditional Knowledge and Traditional Cultural Expressions Act. And then you have the National Museums and Heritage Act, which is in charge of these sites. So of importance is the traditional knowledge. This is where cultural heritage comes into place. So there are certain forms or ways of doing things that communities have always done that in the past helped to bring some, relieve some stress. So take for instance, as Wamora said, next slide, in most cases, you do not encroach certain spaces. So, next. In most cases, you wouldn't encroach in certain spaces. Take, for instance, sacred sites. Some of these sites were considered sacred, so you'd not encroach on them. So the aspect of having buffer zones is extremely important. There is need for the government and community to ensure that that is respected, because you know there is development that is happening rapidly. So take, for instance, in these lake systems, you have hotels being set up. Take, for instance, this one. You were told that not so long ago, this whole place was flooded. And so the question arises, who should move or what should be done? Of course, one of the key things that people should take note of is there is need for relocations, especially these hotels. As sad as it sounds, it could be expensive, but it seems that it's one of the only means that could be used to adapt and save some of these livelihoods. Need for relocations, respecting of boundaries, laws on planning. Previously, community leaders were involved, and you could not just set up things anyhowly, as we were told last time. So there is need for effective land use management and so forth. So those are the things that this paper addresses. And yeah, we hope it will be a good read. Many thanks. The next presentation is a virtual presentation.
I think you had.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I will let Professor Mbote moderate the discussion and any questions to the two presenters.
Thank you very much. I think now we are learning that we think that environmental law stands alone, but environmental law is really integral to our lives from where we are. And I think the problem is that we use religion, because religion is a formalized system. but being is not as formalized a system. So like when you tell us about Goyodala, is that a religion or is it a way of being that you're aware of it even without being told? So I begin by saying that we have a lot of confluence now, or agreement, that to deal with the poly-crisis that we have, we cannot just use the multilateral environmental agreements. We must actually go beyond. And in fact, we go beyond formal religions to even traditional religions. That's why we are talking, if you look at global environmental processes, the integration of indigenous communities is really front and center. And this has become more urgent with the changing climate, where you have the earth heating up and looking at what are the solutions. And so in that space, people are now looking, what can we do? And so what Dr. Wamwara was talking about is really current. And I don't even want to go back to what he was talking about, where are you going? And looking at our lives as not just being here, but having come from a place and going somewhere. I think if you look for the people that I taught property law, there was a Ghanaian chief, Nana Ofori, talking about land, and as people were grappling for individual land rights. And he was saying that land belongs to many who have gone. Many, now those of us who are living, but countless unborn. So in essence, there is transcendence. There is what we inherited, and then who is coming. And that is, if you're looking at international environmental law, that is where you're talking about intergenerational rights. And I liked the point you made that dominion is predicated on care and propagation. You know, like for me, yesterday when people were taking, and I know even for Alvin and for this group, when people are taking pictures of me taking water from a plastic bottle, I feel like I am sinning. Because currently we are all, I feel like I'm committing a sin. Because I don't use plastic bottles. Not because it is against the law, but because I know all these bottles we are using, if they are not recycled, they go back to the environment. They are the ones that are going into the ocean and choking life in the oceans. You may think that this is extreme. It is not. So you probably will see that in these people's bags, there is a refillable bottle. Because that is what now we are getting into. And in fact, in many places, refillable bottles, that you carry your bottle so that you fill it up and you don't have to, if I was being extreme, I would actually have said, because UNEP is supporting this system, we shouldn't have plastic bottles. And I may have offended a cardinal rule because plastic bottles are no-go. Anyway, that is a digression, but it just shows how environmental norms and the way we deal with the environment is really inculcated into us. You don't have to go to the law to see what is happening. With religion, religions have actually gone ahead, Dr. Wamwara. I'm sure you're familiar with Pope Francis' encyclical, Laudato Si. Laudato Si is actually translated as praise be to God. And the praise is for the environment, and it calls for a global dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet through our daily actions. Laudato Si is, you know, the Pope's encyclicals are read in all Catholic spaces. And in fact, that has now become a movement. The Pope gave another encyclical, Laudato Deum, to deal with climate change specifically, looking at what happened at the Paris Agreement in 2015 and what still needs to be done. So that I think is something we need to look at. Then there is, after the Laudato Si, Laudato Deum, the Muslims have not been left behind. There is Al-Mizan. Al-Mizan translates as balance, and it is drawn from the Quran. Surah Al-Rahman, the Merciful, as the Muslims will say, is the one who is talking about balance. So we are all talking about caring for our common home and drawing on the different faiths. So Dr. Wamwara, we already have the curriculum. UNEP and the Law Division has an initiative, the Faith for Earth Initiative. And this is an initiative that promotes faith leadership. And it's looking at faith-based organizations and faith communities as custodians of far-reaching, value-based perspectives on environmental sustainability. And actually, Al-Mizan was a publication of this initiative at the Law Division. So in essence, then, we are saying that we have what it takes. And we are looking at not just formal religions, we are also looking at traditional religion. So for instance, Dr. Wamwara, I'm sure in many communities here, before you eat, and I know Alvin's community does that, they will be spitting on their chest or pouring a little drink on the ground before they drink it. The libation, because you are appeasing the ancestors. So in essence, we have all these norms. And I am challenging you, Dr. Wamwara, as you develop the curriculum, to actually talk to these different spaces. Then we come to the cultural sites, Eric. Cultural sites are actually spaces that are natural habitats, some of them, recognized, some of them by the World Heritage, as World Heritage Sites through UNESCO. I would like to challenge you to, I don't know whether you're using this, I haven't seen your full paper, to look at the concept of planetary boundaries. Because planetary boundaries is a concept that requires the Earth, first of all, recognizes the Earth system as a cohesive, intricate network of interconnected parts with dynamic and complex interrelationships. So we need to begin aligning the things we are doing with those planetary boundaries. Masharia has written on planetary boundaries. You can actually talk to him. In essence, what they are saying is the planet can only take so much. And they are actually talking about these having been transgressed. There are, I believe, about 7 planetary boundaries, and 6, they say, have been transgressed. At the United Nations, we are not yet speaking this language of planetary boundaries, but there is a lot of studies going on. And then I'd like you also to think about rights of nature. Yesterday, I briefly talked about the rights of nature. And rights of nature are a way of aligning legal standards and principles with these planetary boundaries. And again, this is a very powerful, non-anthropocentric and holistic tool for dealing with the things that we are saying. And I'd also like you to look at different spaces where these rights of nature are being recognized. I think the Ecuadorian court has been at the forefront on recognition of rights of nature. If you look at the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, it also does recognize the rights of nature, talking about Mother Earth. And when we begin to talk about Mother Earth, what you're looking at is the capacity of reproducing itself. And we now have universal declarations for the rights of Mother Earth, universal declaration for the rights of rivers, and universal declaration for the rights of oceans. And you see, you may extend this when you're looking at Lake Nakuru to the rights of lakes. So I'd like to get your reactions to that. Wamwara first. First of all, it only makes me realize that probably we are not getting the information that we have in the UN to spaces where you have it, because you already have a curriculum. In fact, for us, what we've been feeling is that this work on faith communities is already done. And we have a very, very active member of staff, Iyad Abu Mogli. Right now, as we speak, is actually meeting the Pope and looking at how do you deal with the issue of Laudato Si, and how do you get this out. And actually, his narrative is that faith organizations like the Catholic Church, like Islam, like even the Buddhists, are they have a lot of reach. You see, like the Catholic Church, what is read in Rome is what is read in the village, in any part of the world where there is a Catholic Church. And that means that you can get that out. There is another narrative that he has, which this is not a UN position, it's my own position. The fact that they have a lot of property, and because I'm a property lawyer, I know they have a lot of property because of colonialism, and that for me is problematic. Okay, so Wamwara, and then Masafu.
Oh, I don't know that I can. I can stand here. A lot of what we do at, let me start by saying that, number one, I agree that Christianity has been, and very big Christian organizations have been deliberate about speaking to the environment and having many organizations that work on this field. And I agree also that the Catholic Church and its approach to, and the effect of whatever is decided in Rome is very influential on what happens in the local. But I'm looking at me and the many places that Kenyans go, and my focus, of course, was Kenya. And the message that if you destroy the earth, you are not going to, if you are a violator of the environmental conservation, if you pollute the environment, you're not going to heaven. It's not very much out. So yes, the church position is out there. And yes, how do we therefore ensure that, how do we change culture? For example, we have all these things, and you get out there and you are driving and you see how Kenyans just throw things off, they just throw things through their window. And then you wonder, what happens? You have this and you have just eaten it, and then you are walking on the road and you don't mind just discarding the wrap. So yes, I agree that a lot of things that have happened up there, how do we make it local? That's my thought. And of course, let it be as often as, for example, growing up, one of the best places to go to elders of the church's homes, because you could understand and see the order with which there was an orchard there, there was a garden somewhere, because there was a lot of thought that went into planning their homesteads. A lot of that has changed, and not much is happening as we speak. But yes, I agree that we just need to think about how to localize the very universal positions that have been reached by the church at the very highest level. And then the other thing, of course, is you asked about Gorodala and why, whether it's just an aspect of being not very religious as we think. But my problem is, for example, this is me, and it's an experience that I had. I went home the other day, and I am the firstborn of the first son of my parents, and there are two boys behind me, and the pain they go through trying to explain to you why it is important to go Dala. My dad is aging, and he's telling me, I'll not die in peace. I'll not die. If I die today, I'll not die in peace if I don't go and Chweyoni Dala, tell you where to put up your home. You see? So there's an aspect of religion, and those are the things that compel them. Because he says, even if I die, I will not die in peace, because there's a spiritual aspect to what I'm asking you to do. Okay? And then, of course, the other thing is the Muslim declaration and how, and I also saw so many Muslim organizations are coming up, and they're looking at environmental conservation as a hijrah, as a religious duty, and many of them come into these spaces as well. So I agree with you, there's so much that we need to look into, and even as we continue talking, see how we can engage to ensure that a lot of what happens up there comes back here to change our values. Thank you. Thank you.
Just some response from Masafu. As those who have questions, please prepare them. Let them be short and snappy, because we'll give the opportunity for a number of questions.
Mine maybe was just to take those considerations you've said. Actually, I had not looked at it from that perspective of the planetary boundaries. I was just reviewing it now. Maybe it's something I'll need to pick up with Masharia and maybe see the paper I've written and how the same can be incorporated into it, as well as the rights of nature.
Part of your PhD, so I know that there's a lot of pain in these kinds of things. I hope I am not making your life more complex. Questions to or responses to Masafu and Dr. Wamwara? Or is it too early? Okay, Professor Lumumba.
Dr. Wamwara and Masafu had already told the good doctor, but I'm saying it publicly, that he should look at Buddhism. There is a lot of work, and Hinduism, and I specifically asked him to read the Mahabharata and to watch the movie. You'll see how the question of environment is given its pride of place. So as you enrich your paper, it's important to look at those.
Thank you, Dr. Wamara, for the presentation. I'm wondering, there is a rise in atheism, and we see that even the generations that we are seeing coming up, they may not be as religious, and then they are not connected to culture. So maybe, I don't know what your take is on this. If we are going to have more people going into atheism, people not really understanding the traditional cultures, then they are there in the middle. So what is your take on that as concerns the presentation that you made?
Any other question? Am I missing? I think those are the two. So we will have Dr. Wamara respond.
Thank you. I want to say thank you very much, Doc. We had a discussion, and yes, I will. I have a copy of the Mahabharata. Let me go read again, and then look for the movie as well. And then number two, on atheists, and you know, there's a misunderstanding that atheists don't believe in anything. Some of the most ethical people I've met are actually atheists, because their word is their word. They don't have to look for a bigger being to whatever it is that they want to say. Yes. So yes, the atheists they live by a code. A lot of them believe in the formal processes, so that if there is a law, they will adhere to the law. And if they are, especially their belief in conservation of the environment, because they also believe we are not going anywhere, so we are here. You die, but others also should come in and enjoy your world as well. So I think yes, while we will focus on those who believe, I could also look at and say something about atheists and what they believe in. That is if we insist that atheism is a form of religion as well, or a lack of religion. So, thank you. But Prof, you could add to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think many people who don't believe in God or a formalized religion have a concept of a higher power, whether that power is innate or outside of them. So that again is something. But I'd just like to leave you with, we can't just say that because we don't believe, we just mistreat the environment. Some of the things that we do are good manners. And good manners really cannot be legislated. It is the ethical knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. Thank you very much, Macharia. So I hand over back to you.
Thank you very much. I believe that was very well done, and the points that came out resonate with us. I have one comment, and probably it's a question, an exercise. What would you understand, and probably Professor Mbote, Alvin, and Polycarp shouldn't answer. I think we were in a conference at some point, and one of the points that came out, or one of the phrases, was social fences are better than physical fences in environmental protection. Okay, social fences are better than physical fences in environmental protection. So I want you to think through that, think through what would that mean, and then I'll take a couple of answers in course of moving forward. Okay, I think we are doing well. We will move to a next session, which we didn't manage to go through yesterday. We have 2 presentations, and then we will pick up on environmental rights thereafter. They are Gen Zs. They have promised to have military precision with time. I trust them for that. We will have Morioki as the discussant. If I could please invite him to take over. Keep 7 minutes each presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. My name is Moriyuki. Yes, and I'll welcome the presentation from, I think, Polycarp Moturi and the previous discussant. I think they'll tell us who is presenting which, and then the next is from Anita. I think there's a whole team. Yeah, Anthony Kanani. And then I'll, once they present, I think then we can dialogue. Thanks. So we could begin.
Good morning. I hope you're doing well. My name is Anthony Kanani from the Faculty of Law, Egerton University. And yesterday, as we were having our conversation on climate change, it occurred to me that a certain former president of the United States of America did state that climate change is a creation of the Chinese to make America non-competitive. So I was wondering, and now we have a conversation on carbon offsets, and Dr. Kituku did set stage, and carbon offsets is a quite controversial area, and I hope that going forward, we are really going to have a thorough discussion around that area. So we wrote a paper together with Florida Musi and Anita Mosi on the innovation and development of carbon offset projects as a way of addressing climate change and environmental justice. Basically, we are trying to critique the role of carbon offsets because Kenya leads regionally in terms of selling carbon credits. Since 2014, Kenya has been selling carbon credits, and carbon offsets is the brain behind carbon credits. So without a carbon offset project, you won't be having carbon credits. So let's have that discussion, and I invite that we go through with it together. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, so what are the key takeaways in our paper? Number one, we are going to understand carbon offsets, then we deal with the legal framework, and then you want to view carbon offsets as a technological innovation. Is it really a technological innovation? There are still questions on that because for me, carbon offsets projects, I think they've been around. Because when you talk about environmental conservation measures, such as reforestation, these are things that you do. When we are talking about solar power, these are things that you do, but then they have been coined under a term called carbon offset projects. After that, you are going to look at the environmental justice aspect of carbon offsetting projects. Then we'll have some few case studies where these projects have been implemented in the country. And then you are going to have some challenges, an overview, and then recommendations under the ambit of way forward. So before that, I hope it has sound. We have a video. I thought it would be prudent that we have some background on the innovation of carbon offsetting projects as a way of addressing climate change. Yes? No, no, you're having a problem, so we'll just bypass it. Let's go to the next slide. Technician, please, kindly assist us. Yes. Okay. So, with the advent of the Climate Change Amendment Act, that was last year, and now we have the carbon markets regulations that was enacted in May 2024. We now have clearer definitions that have been contextualized in the Kenyan arena on what entails carbon offsets. And we could say that carbon offsets, according to the Climate Change Amendment Act 2023, that they refer to the voluntary or involuntary trading systems in which carbon credits are sold and bought. So the term here is systems, projects, right? And then carbon offsets have been idealized. So the idea is to compensate for carbon emissions produced elsewhere through funding projects that reduce or remove an equivalent amount of emissions from the atmosphere. So basically, we are talking about where we have corporations who are not able to limit their GHG emissions. Now, they are able to fund projects elsewhere in countries such as Kenya, and then ideally, the idea is ideally, we are able to balance. So they produce GHG here, but then at the same time, they are able to advance projects that are able to conserve the environment. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the importance of carbon offsetting in climate mitigation, I've already talked about this. We are talking about sustainable development and net zero goals, carbon budget balance, where we see that corporations, organizations are able to balance their emissions by funding projects elsewhere. We're also seeing complementing emission reduction efforts. So when you look at the Paris Agreement, also the Kyoto Protocol, which has been now overtaken by the Paris Agreement of 2015, the idea is to ensure that countries under the emission reduction ambit, that countries, organizations are able to advance the GHG reduction efforts. Yes. Now, the legal framework under carbon offsets, when I was going through this, or rather when we were going through this, the Constitution of Kenya, I believe, is alive to carbon offsetting projects, because when you look at Article 42 of the Constitution of Kenya, you go to Article 66 and Article 69, when you're talking about sustainable development, when you're talking about issues that do not harm the environment, when you're talking about protection of the environment, carbon offsets fall under this ambit. Then I've also talked about the Climate Change Amendment Act of 2023. It has contextualized carbon credits in the Kenyan context. And actually, Kenya is a front runner. At the moment, Kenya is the only country in Africa with a carbon offsetting project or carbon credits legislative framework. We also have the Climate Change Carbon Market Regulation 2024. They are trying to address issues to do with the trading of carbon credits. Because as you are going to look further, we are going to see reports where we see transparency, corruption, challenges, and the carbon climate change coming into place tries to address those issues. Then you also have the MCA of 1999, because at this point, as I stated earlier, we are looking at afforestation, reforestation, and other environmental conservation projects. Yes, next slide. The legal framework continued. We talk about the Energy Act, because if you're talking about carbon offsets, emission reductions, we're also talking about adapting greener energy projects. Now we could talk about the Olekaria geothermal power production plants, which have been funded by the World Bank. Through the Olekaria, Kenya leads at least 90% in having terms of clean energy, and the Olekaria could fall under a carbon offsetting project. We also have the Forest Conservation and Management Act of 2016. We have seen the government under President Ruto's ambition is trying to see that we are able to have a tree plant cover of at least 10%. So again, whatever you are doing, that tree planting is a carbon offsetting project. The Kyoto Protocol, it sets pace. We could see that through the common but differentiated responsibility. We are seeing emissions trading, the clean development mechanism, CDM, and through these frameworks, carbon offsets in some way provide critical financial, I'm privy to time, critical financial tool for developing countries to be able to advance other mitigation and adaptation strategies. So that being said, perhaps we should address the challenges and the criticism around it. Please, let's go to the, let's move again. Yes, not the other slide. So, as you all know, the carbon offsetting framework is a quite controversial area. And in our paper, we did pick some challenges. And these are through reports as early as May. We could see the carbon brief report, which says at least 70% of projects harm local communities. We talk about the Maasai community, where these projects are very prevalent. We are talking about the Turkana people, the Ndila communities. These people, their rights are always violated, indigenous rights. We're also talking about economic inequalities, because if you're talking about environmental justice, we are talking about equal benefits, equality. So you see, we have carbon offsetting projects, organizations launching these projects, but then the amount of money, the amount of financial muscle that is retained at the community level, with whatever they have stated in the paper, is there's a big gap around it. We're also seeing issues to do with lack of transparency, questionable effectiveness. If you go to the Simon Council's report just released recently, there's a lot of issues on the effectiveness of carbon offset projects in advancing climate change and environmental justice. We're also dealing with regulatory challenges. As you have said, Kenya has indeed enacted a robust environmental regulatory framework, but then are we implementing these things, right? So, recommendations, we could say that what do we need to do to ensure that indeed carbon offsetting projects are working for us? We are saying that we need to strengthen community participation and consent, because public participation goes hand in hand with environmental justice. We're talking about environmental democracy, so public participation is a key pillar. If you're talking about the integration of indigenous rights, public participation is a key pillar. Again, we are talking about investing in and implementing robust monitoring and evaluation frameworks. The carbon regulations do provide a robust framework, but then there's a challenge, implementation. So the Kenyan government needs to come in and put in structures and funds to ensure that these structures are implemented and see to the success of carbon offsetting projects. We're also saying streamline, equitable, and fair sharing of accrued benefits. Again, the Market Regulations Act of Regulations rather of 2024 have envisaged that we are going to have what we call a designated national authority that is going to register nationally carbon offsets. So we think that if that nationally designated authority on carbon offsets comes into place, it should at first, in the first instance, streamline, equitable, and fair sharing of accrued benefits and ensure indeed that carbon offsets do advance environmental justice. Lastly, we are talking about enhanced transparency and accountability. If we go through the Simon Council's report and the carbon brief report, these are issues that we believe, with the structures that have been put in place, are going to be addressed. So I believe my apologies. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. I'll give my observations after the second presentation, because there are only two in this cohort. So Polycarp Muturi will speak to us about the role of intellectual property in advancing climate innovation and environmental justice.
Sorry. Thank you for the presentations. We had missed one presentation on beyond formal law, and I think it's good that we finish with it while Professor Mbote is still here, in case there are comments. Our presenter is online. If you could please confirm, all the way from Cameroon. Dr. Amel, if you can hear me.
Very well, sir.
All right, thank you very much. We know it's very early in the morning. If you can hear me, please proceed. And we will, if you have slides, please let us know so we allow, we enable you to share your screen. Thank you.
It's difficult for me to share my screen. I don't know if you can allow me.
Hi. If you can hear me, are you able to communicate or speak in English? Most of our audience understands or speaks English. If that's okay.
So I think I can go without sharing my screen. If you can have the, because I think I share my work with Dr. Ruth. Don't know if you can put it on the screen. So I will just follow my presentation, sir. Can I go on?
We can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mbote, for giving me the floor in order to share with you the work we made in Cameroon on the topic assessing the level of knowledge, attitude, and practice toward plastic pollution among Cameroonians, implications for minimizing plastic use and pollution. So I'm Dr. Valding Egerton from Cameroon, and this work has been made with my colleague, Dr. Wakel, from the University of Yaoundé 1. So I will show the plan that you can on 4 points. So you have introduction and problematic, methodology, result and discussion, and then conclusion and perspective. So at the introduction and problematic level, we know that this study assesses the problem of plastic pollution as a consequence of poor plastic waste management. So plastic pollution has been today most highly visible environmental problem in the world. 6 decades ago, mass production of plastic began accelerating so rapidly so that it has created 1.3 billion tons of plastic, and over 19% of it isn't recycled. So current waste management practice in Africa has economic, social, and environmental impact. In Cameroon, for example, it is estimated, it is estimated that over 1,300 tons plastic waste are dumped every day, and about 300,000 tons of this waste are produced annually. So Cameroon depends heavily on the disposal of waste in landfill and domestic burning system, posing an increased risk of diseases, fraud, and environmental pollution due to climate change. Please, can I continue? Hello?
We can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So according to the literature, the most basic of several causes of plastic waste pollution lies in limited environmental culture of humans, which is so through widespread action today, such as littering without sorting, abuse of nylon bags and disposable plastic items because of their low cost and convenience, regardless of the very hard to decompose properties of plastic. Then, reduce plastic consumption and raising awareness about plastic recycling is crucial if we are to overcome the problem of plastic waste and pollution on our continent and planet. For this reason, the essential solution is education, change consumption habits, and raise public awareness about plastic waste, reduce the use of plastic products, especially single-use plastics, to promote and encourage the community to recycle and reuse plastic products, or use environmentally friendly alternatives. So it has been reported that attitude and knowledge related to plastic pollution can influence people's behavior. People having relevant knowledge are recognized as an important and influential factor affecting behavior, practices, and the implementation of recycling programs. But there has been little attention paid to people's attitude or behavior about the hazard of plastic when interventions are designed for the reduction of plastic problems. In the world, there have been some studies focused on CAP, so knowledge, attitude, and practice perspective related to plastic pollution in different countries in Europe, in Asia, and Africa, such as studies in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. However, there is lack of studies on the relationship between knowledge, attitude, and practices toward plastic pollution in Cameroon. For that gap, our study set out to assess the level of knowledge, attitude, and practice toward plastic pollution among Cameroonians, as well as the variation of plastic pollution related to CAP among various socio-demographic groups. So at the methodological level, an online survey was conducted to understand the CAP among the residents in Yaoundé age 18 years, 15 years and older for plastic pollution. So a self-administered questionnaire was used in collecting relevant information based on study objectives. This study adopted descriptive survey design, thus descriptive statistics, CAP scoring, and cost tabulation of response are estimated. In addition, a one-way analysis of variance, test, correlation, and linear regression was performed on the IBM SPSS version. So our result and discussion. Results show low average knowledge and practices score, but high average attitude score toward reducing plastic pollution among inhabitants in Yaoundé. So a significant relation was found between knowledge of plastics impact on the environment and human attitude and practice variable. This means that high level of knowledge on plastics impact, like marine, soil, or air pollution, human health, flooding, or fooding, positively determines the adoption of positive attitudes toward plastic pollution, such as willingness to participate in effort to promote recovering and recycling of single-use plastic waste, promote recovering and recycling the use of single-use plastics waste, volunteer for an environmental cause against plastic waste, or pay extra for their use. So in addition, these positive attitudes positively determine practices of measures to reduce plastic pollution, such as avoid buying new plastic packaging, reuse or recycle household plastic waste, choose products that use less plastic purchase, packaging, etc. Regarding socio-demographic factors associated with CAP score, we find the findings show that only gender is associated with CAP score to promote good practice toward minimizing single-use and pollution, means that women are more inclined to adopt good attitude and practice. In the case of fighting plastic pollution. So, conclusion and perspective. We noted that conclusion within the perspective of the theory and plain behavior is how by undertaking interventions such as raising environmental awareness, incorporating plastic pollution topics into formal and informal education. Therefore, recommend that education in solving plastic pollution should be considered as best practice addressing climate change and environmental justice. Strengthen legal framework, legislative and policy reform to limit plastic pollution by tracking down and censuring violators of the regulations on plastic management. So our attitude and behavior toward plastic must change to ensure a safe and healthy future for our planet. So thank you for your kind attention. Je vous remercie infiniment pour votre bien aimable attention. Je reste à vous pour la suite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amel, for a very well thought out presentation. May I please invite Professor Mbote to make a few remarks and probably take a question or two on that particular presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amel, for your presentation. And you're actually addressing a very pertinent issue. Just to point out that the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is the governance body of the United Nations Environment Program, in 2022, I believe in March, concluded a resolution to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. And the request was made to the United Nations Environment Program Executive Director to establish an intergovernmental negotiating committee to develop this instrument. And they were actually guided that they would develop the instrument based on a comprehensive approach that addresses the full life cycle of plastic, including its production, its design, and disposal. And the INC was established, and it has a very ambitious aim of concluding the instrument by the end of this year. The first meeting was held in Uruguay. The second one was held in France. The third one was held in Kenya. The fourth one in Canada. And now they are gearing for the fifth and final meeting in South Korea. And the issues that you're raising, Dr. Amel, are things that are going to likely be provided guidance for in this instrument. There is already a draft that is what will be discussed in Busan in South Korea. But I'd like to, plastic is a problem. I think, first of all, the fact that it's not biodegradable, the fact that it has become extremely ubiquitous. We find plastic in everything. But probably it should worry us that now particles of microplastics are finding their way into our bloodstream because of the fact that we use it for different things. And that's why the issues that Dr. Amel raises, especially the education, but also he talks about something we discussed yesterday, citizen science and engagement of communities. So any questions for Dr. Amel? Or is it so daunting that we have microplastics in our system? We do not want to begin to attack plastic less. Dr. Amel, I don't see any, you must have made a very clear and erudite presentation. Dr. Aura, you have a question? Thank you very much, Dr. Amel, and we look forward to seeing your published work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Palika.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to present I just want to present on how intellectual property helps in protecting the environment and, of course, fighting climate change. And I just wish to start with the issue of the one Prof stated about being afraid of drinking plastic water, because in one way or another, that's a way, or that's, she's attached to intellectual property in a way, because in many cases, this is an aspect of intellectual property in that you look at what we call the designs. There's what we call, there are different forms of intellectual property, and one of the forms is industrial designs, and the forms of intellectual properties, industrial designs, which includes even branding. And this branding actually attracts how people perceive a certain good or services that is produced to the public, and in a way it will help in fighting climate change or protecting the environment. So in one way or another, if you go to where Prof works, or Mashari or Alvin, you find that they don't, they have a perception of not using plastic bottles, and if maybe is traveling or moving from one point to another, he tends not to buy plastic water because of the pain he'll undergo in disposing that bottle of water. And maybe if he finds a recyclable plastic bottle, you find that he will use it at the end of the day, or that is the one that he can buy, because he has a perception that this one can be recyclable, and he will tend to buy from companies that produce such types of plastics. And that's one way of intellectual property. Of course, I'm going to that. But of course, there are various forms of intellectual property which we have. We have patents, which are various inventions. And one thing I wish to say is that everything around you is a form of intellectual property. These buildings, everything you see around you is in one way or another intellectual property. And also, there's a way it will contribute to climate change, or either in fighting or making it worse. So when you look at intellectual property, you'll find that we have traditional knowledge, Of course, this is knowledge that has been passed from one generation to another over years, and mostly it applies in the African context, and it's very important in these days that we use it in integrating with this other scientific knowledge so that we're able to fight climate change. We also have trademarks, and then we have copyrights. Copyrights are the ones that are used in most cases, like even architectural design, so where you find that they protect the architecture, or they use the architecture of this, of designing a certain, when someone designs a certain architecture, they find that, let's say it's a riparian land, an architecture will make sure that they have designed the building in a way that it is able to meet the riparian needs of that area. But then they have to protect, or they have to use it in a way that it does not affect the environment. But then if you look at the World Intellectual Property Organization report, they say that there has been an uptake of inventions, 13%, there has been a 13% increase of climatic inventions yearly compared to other inventions in other fields, which runs between 3 to 4% increase of inventions. So these are great improvement, especially towards fighting climate change. And I would like to move to, yes, move to the other slide. So you find that climate, of course, climate has been an issue to us, and it really affects us. And intellectual property has come, intellectual property through various forms, which are patents, which are industrial designs, which are also trademarks. They have been helping in fighting the environment. And with the increase, or with the climate, with the increase in climate change and increase in temperatures, we need to use these inventions and this knowledge to ensure that we've protected the environment in various ways. But then, in as much as these rights help in protecting the environment, we can say rights such as the patents, they have limitations. Because the first thing is for someone to invent something, they need, it's like a commercialization of these rights. They have to get some incentive. And laws came into place to ensure that these inventions have to continue. And for them to continue, they need to protect the people who come up with them. So, for like an example is like patents. They have a lifespan. If someone creates a patent or invents something, they have a lifespan of 20 years. Of course, that 20 years has limitations on the aspect of we call evergreening, where they can expand on the current patent so that they can continue using it and protecting the others from using it. So this I can say is a challenge, because sometimes it prevents other people from using the patent. And if there was a scientific knowledge or scientific invention that could be used in protecting the environment, then such a protection sometimes is a detriment in preventing or fighting climate change. But then, if you look at it from the other side, is that the protection helps in preventing climate change in such a way that the people who are given these rights or who are given this protection, they ensure that at least they have earned something, and it motivates other people to also use the existing knowledges to advance more, so that at the end of the day you realize that climate change or protection of the environment or environmental justice has been achieved. But then if you move forward and you realize that, okay, there's a slight issue with my slides, but they are sorting it out. So under the patents also we have an issue of which prevents inventions or continued protection or fight for climate change. The issue of, no, my time is up, I have not even started. Okay, so I rush to. So what happens is that these inventions, they have a number of challenges, of course, on the issues of licensing
There's high licensing cost on the issue of especially like patents, and there's limited cost to access these patents, especially for the developing countries and the marginalized communities. Of course, and also there's technology transfer barriers, especially in the developing countries, because they don't have the technological muscles to support or to help in this, to support them in advancing these technological advancements or this intellectual property. So it will be a problem, it becomes a problem in using them to fight climate change, and you find that at the end of the day, they are not able to use them, or they're not able to continue fighting climate change and protecting the environment. But then, there's an issue of, there's a way we can bridge this gap and protect or help these countries, developing countries and even marginalized groups, to use these inventions, to use these property rights, so that they can advance their knowledge and help them protect the environment and fight climate change. Of course, there's the issue of what we call compulsory licensing. These are concept that was brought about by the World Intellectual Property Organization, where governments can actually, through various means, force countries or maybe the inventors to remit some rights to individuals. Like now the issue of COVID, the issue of compulsory licensing was given so that the vaccines could be allowed to be produced in other countries, so that they can continue using them, or they can be able to use them in places that they could not invent them, so that to allow other companies, especially in developing countries, to use them. This can be allowed even in climate change aspects or environmental aspects, because it's a big issue and it's on a need basis. Then we have an issue of course open source initiatives, where we have an issue of or an aspect of eco-patents or eco-patent commons, where companies, countries come together and they allow green patents to be put in a certain site, so that anyone can access it, anyone wants to advance, or anyone wants to use it in protecting climate change, they're able to use it or protect it. Then we also have the WIPO Green. WIPO Green is the WIPO World Intellectual Property Organization site, where someone can go and access a patent or an invention, so that they can use it later to protect or to advance more, so that they can protect the environment. And then, because of time, I can say there are also the international framework, international laws, which also help in protect the environment. And we have the Paris Agreement, which supports the use of the transfer of these technological advancements. Like under its Article 10, it helps or it advises countries with more technological advancements to ensure that this technology has been transferred to the other countries, especially on the issue of protecting the environment and fighting climate change, so that these other countries can use it in protecting the environment, because developing countries are the one actually that are affected more on the issue of climate change. So if they get these technological advancements given to them in an affordable way or in a free way, they can able to use it to protect and have environmental justice achieved. Then also we have of course the trade-related aspects of intellectual property, where these are an agreement which allows, of course, countries. It's also the one that allows compulsory license to be applied by various countries, and it helps in if there's a complex or there's an invention that is so expensive to get or to achieve. These countries or these inventions can be used at the end of the day to be used in the various marginalized groups or developed countries to achieve climate change or to protect the environment. And we also have the WIPO also, the World Intellectual Property guides various countries and organizations on how to the transfer of knowledge from various countries or from various organizations to the marginalized ones, so that they can able to use them in protecting the environment. And another way we can help in achieving this is to ensure that there is capacity building, of course, through various stakeholders, because most people don't understand this concept of intellectual property, and also integrating traditional knowledge, especially in the African context, to these other scientific inventions, so that in as much as there's a scientific invention and there's an existing traditional knowledge, they're able to use it to protect the environment and advance environmental justice. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Polycarp, and the earlier presenter. Yeah, in the first presentation, I think we heard about the carbon offsets and the politics around it. And obviously, it's a conversation that has been ongoing. If you listen to a number of organizations, academia, civil society, and even the private sector around carbon credits, carbon markets, and what that also means for land rights, as well as indigenous rights. So there are concerns certainly around, while the benefits could be there as a market mechanism, because carbon offsets are a market mechanism, the inequality issues begin to arise. Because remember that we've been told that indigenous communities mostly depend on nature. So whether it be forests or other places. So they depend a lot on nature. And it is this nature that is sort of being traded in the carbon market. And so, and maybe the benefits that accrue from the carbon offsets or the carbon markets do not proportionately go to those indigenous communities. And so there's an equality question around that. And it reminds us again that, you know, even when we speak about climate change, there are political aspects of climate change, the politics of climate change. And we have always to be always alive to those issues, because we could try to solve an environmental problem, but then exacerbate inequality or exacerbate resource conflict or another kind of conflict, even as we try to resolve that. So the whole point of this is that we must see dealing with climate change not only as an economic issue, which carbon offsets tells us, not only as a technological issue, which we spoke about AI yesterday and a few other technologies that could potentially help solve the climate change issue, but also as a political issue. And so maybe it's a more discussion for political science as well to be in this space even more. Second presentation was around the role of IP or intellectual property in dealing with climate change and environmental justice. And we've gone to the age-old question about what intellectual property does. And intellectual property essentially secures the rights of the patent holders or the IP holders. And we know, again, even in property rights, that helps incentivize investment when you're sure that your property rights are protected. But of course, we also know the converse is also true. If you restrict too much because of a lot of property rights, then again, can lead to underutilization. We know also the reverse or the flip of the coin of intellectual property rights. And Polycarp was trying to illustrate those two sides, and then trying to show us a way forward. That's why he was talking about the exceptions that are done in IP, compulsory licensing. We saw that during COVID. You know, some governments were trying to, is government really granting permission for you to use an IP that is protected, but because there's an emergency or there's a solution? Or a patent pool where, you know, different patent holders come together, they license one another, or they license it to third parties to actually make use of that which would otherwise be protected. And so those are potential pathways around which to go around the intellectual property restrictions. So I think for the next few minutes we can hear comments from the floor or questions to the authors of the papers. We could take a few questions. Yes, thanks. We could have, yeah, her hand was up first. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I have a question to Polycarp. I was wondering, I'm sure that Kenya also has a lot of, let's say, technologies developed to adapt to climate change. I'm talking about water purification methods, probably also solar panels or any kind of other technologies which are very much suitable for the region here, which we in Europe, let's say, do not have or haven't thought about. So is there any How are you dealing with these technologies? Do they have patent protection? Do you export such technologies to other African countries? So that would be my one question. The other question, you mentioned briefly the eco-budgets, and maybe you can spend 1 or 2 more minutes to tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you very much. And one of the issues I had was that local technologies, especially also in climate change adaptation, there are quite a number of technologies that have come up, for instance, on clean stoves, and how the intellectual properties of rights over those can facilitate the protection of the planet through addressing climate change. But my second issue is another genus of intellectual property rights, geographical indications. And the reason I'm asking about geographical indications is because, for instance, if you look at some of the water that we take, like Keringet is said to be from a particular geographical space. So can we use geographical indications to foster climate action?
Yeah, thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. My first question goes to the presenters on carbon offsets, as well as presenters on intellectual property. Well, personally, I take the position that we should not have carbon offsets in the first place. If we need to solve this climate crisis, let's just ban fossil fuels. But then, now that we have offsets here, then let's try and make the best out of them. But we have this problem of some offsets, projects, and technologies being touted as climate solutions, yet they could potentially aggravate the situation. Actually, they would encourage more consumption of fossil fuels, and therefore presenting false solutions. Good example is what? Geoengineering. I read somewhere that some inventor was proposing that we spray some chemical high up there in the stratosphere to deflect the heat rays back to the back into space, and therefore cool down the heating of the planet. So such solutions, are they not likely to aggravate this problem? Because one, not very well tested. Two, they still continue encouraging the polluting activities, yeah? And also capturing carbon, storing it in the ground through, again, geoengineering. So how can we ensure that some of these innovations never find their way into the market? For the presenter from Cameroon, I don't know if he's still online. Is knowledge and attitudes really the problem that we have to confront in dealing with the plastic waste problem? Or should we lean into the economy, the theories of what? Law and economics? Because plastics are very cheap, extremely cheap. So no matter how much knowledge you, awareness you raise, how much you attempt to change attitudes, for as long as these things are cheap, yeah. If you, those who saw the polling that was done in the elections that Trump won, there was a systemic error in those polls. People would say this, and vote the other way. So I would even imagine for polls of this nature, targeting plastics, is there an inherent bias that people will say they'll support recycling, etc., whereas in truth, for as long as plastics are cheap, nothing is likely to stop people from using them and disposing them terribly. I want to draw an analogy with smoking. I was a smoker many years back. I dropped the habit. And the first impact I saw in my life is that there were so many coins in my university room. Too many coins lying around. So there was an economic benefit. Probably that's what made me continue. But when government started taxing cigarettes punitively, many of my friends dropped the habit. So rather than spend a lot of time on raising awareness, etc., and leaning on theories of law and economics, why not just focus on punitive taxation to sort out these problems one for all? Make plastics expensive, and there will be very little incentive to use them or misuse them. Thank you.
Thank you. My question will go to Polycarp. Polycarp, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned something to do with traditional ecological knowledge, and I am thinking in situations where outsiders come and steal or an idea from outside. So I'm wondering, are there like communal patents, or is it possible to patent an idea communally? The other issue is the ethical and considerations that arise from patenting. What are some of the ethical considerations? And also in terms of benefit sharing, how is it done and how does it scale down to the community level? My other question will go to Anthony. Anthony, on carbon projects and carbon offsetting mechanisms, I feel this whole idea is an idea from the global north and they're trying to impose it on the global south. We are seeing these carbon projects are being implemented more on the global south rather than the global north. So I also feel it's a false solution. And also there is also an issue that is coming up on carbon colonialism, where there is exploitation and manipulation of indigenous communities, and they're not benefiting from this project. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
You posed the question I wanted, carbon and green colonization. I want you to speak to that particular issue. It was on your slide, but you didn't speak to it.
My question is to Professor Mbote. Can UNEP fund students who have a project? Like, for example, NRT makes a lot of money because of this soil carbon removal project and the modified livestock grazing, and it has mostly benefited the Samburu, Maasai, those people. And personally, I also come from a marginalized community, and I'd like to ask if we present our own. We also graze where I come from. Can UNEP fund us?
Okay, I think there's one more. Yeah, but I'm saying about time. Maybe make it extremely brief now that we've already,
Sorry, my name is Andrew again. I've seen that you're also advocating for solutions through open source initiative. This week, from 21st, I'm an advocate of open access information. And this week, we had a celebration of the open access. Maybe I'm putting forward to the participants that the open access theme was community over commercialization. And I read about what you are saying there, and mine is not a question, it was just an input. The other one was from UNEP. Okay, you know, in Africa, you take advantage of situation. I'm taking advantage of this conference, which has been funded by UNEP. I am a candidate, a PhD candidate, undertaking a research on a framework, because we've realized that most of the information remain. Professor Mbote talked about information in all the conferences internationally. That question has been asked. Do you fund research in that area? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we can have Polycarp, you can come and answer the question, then Anthony, and then I think there was a question to Prof, and then we can please be brief.
Thank you so much. I'll try to answer the questions. I know since Prof will have a chance to finish up, I know she'll add on whatever I'll say. So, Professor Monica, on the issue of whether Kenya produces patents which it can also give to the other countries, is that yes, the country tries to, in Kenya we try to produce patents, but then there is also what we call utility models. Utility models are what we call, sometimes we call them short patents. They are not in the strict sense patents, but then they allow for inventions that are not in the strict sense, so that if small scale, maybe inventors have come up with something, they can be protected and be allowed to use that in whatever way, maybe in protection of climate change or an invention in area or improvement of an existing patent, so that it can be protected through utility models. Then on Professor Mbote's geographical indications, of course geographical indications help a lot in fighting climate change and protecting the environment, because these are usually attached to the environment, the climate, and the culture of the people where these indications come from. An example, let's say now the Keringet water. Usually it's attached to the area, how the water is produced, how the climate is, sometimes the coolness of the climate. So, and these people, sometimes they use their knowledge, their traditional knowledge on how to produce it. And there are some aspects they consider which don't exist in other places to come up or to produce this service or good. So when they produce these goods, they ensure that they have in one way protected the environment and ensure that climate change has been protected. And in another way, they commercialize the aspect of intellectual property. Then on the traditional knowledge, recently there is a WIPO treaty that was created, which ensures that if you go to an area and maybe, like, it's now protecting the stealing of, let's say the stealing of knowledge from, especially from the global south. There was a lot of stealing of knowledge, like in Lake Bogoria there was a stealing of some products that were used in the pharmaceutical sector. So right now, before you go to pick or to produce any invention, or to produce any invention that maybe you want to come up with, you have to consult the community and ensure that there's good benefit sharing with the community before you produce that invention, and you have to recognize the community where produced or you came up with that invention from. You don't just go and produce without recognizing them. And then ethical patent considerations. Of course, various laws in various countries, there are patents which cannot be allowed because of ethical reasons. Like right now, for example, let me use, you cannot come up, it's not allowed to say that you've come up with an invention maybe to produce a nuclear weapon in Kenya because that is somehow unethical and against the law. So these ethical issues are really protected, and in as much as you want to bring up inventions, there are some rules which you have to follow so that you don't surpass what has been provided by the law or the ethics of that region or country. Another question from Professor Kituku is that I didn't get your question well, but I understood that you're talking about carbon capture technologies on maybe how to prevent them from coming up. What I will say is that inventions, let's say, especially in the area of climate change or environmental protection, what usually happens is that these inventions, in most cases, they are created to fight or to bring a solution to an existing issue. But then in the process, you find that they have created an invention like how Professor Lumumba was telling us that the lithium batteries, they came so that they can solve a problem. But then there's an existing, they have created another problem of exposing them. But then more inventions can come so that they fix now this. That's where after the 20 years or maybe after the patent pooling, they can be allowed, someone can come with another patent on how to protect or on how to come up with a solution on how to protect or dispose, if it is a lithium batteries, on how to dispose them, or is the issue of carbon capture, on how to improve it so that it doesn't affect the environment at the end of the day. I think those were my questions, and about carbon, green colonization, I think that goes to Kanani. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. If William, you could take up.
Okay.
Very precise.
Yes. Thank you. I think if I would like to start where Polycarp has left it on the issue of carbon solutions. There's a saying that Mother Earth has a way of fending for itself. But then climate change is a reality, right? And then we could all agree that the carbon credits market is quite controversial and problematic. Going to Dr. Kituku's question on climate solutions, more specifically on geoengineering, the effectiveness of these climate solutions. Even before we go to new technological innovations, carbon offset projects have been around. It is only the term. You know, they have coined it under some scientific term, if I may say. But these are things we do every day. If you say we want to go and do biochar technologies where we use charcoal and mix with the soil and then we farm, we are talking about manure from our farms. These are things we have been doing. So carbon offsets is just a term. But then if you look at the Simon Council's report, it was just released recently. The report covers the Northern Rangers Trust carbon offsets projects, particularly among the Rendila communities in Turkana. We also see some in Narok, some here in Naivasha. Across the report, if you read the report, you'll realize there's an issue with effectiveness of carbon offset projects. Is it a sham? Again, is it a global north political strategy? Because if you realize, these projects are mostly funded by these global north companies. And in the Small Council's report, you realize that companies such as Netflix, Facebook, they have been buying carbon credits in Kenya since 2014. But then we don't get to see these companies coming up with ways to see that their processes that lead to an environmental pollution are mitigated. They are saying that we need to fund other projects, other compensation projects in the global south to do what? To fill the gap of emission reduction. So it is a lot of politics, and I could say that carbon offset projects, if they are not going to be implemented properly, with the coming into place of the Carbon Market Regulations 2024, and with the creation of a designated national authority, and if you go through the regulations, you realize that one of the core functions of the designated national authority, rather, is that in the launching, going forward, before the launching of a carbon offset project, you have to do like something like a concept note that goes to the NDA, and then they assess the effectiveness of the process. But then it is in paper. Now, as you all know, Kenya, there's always an implementation challenge. So as I conclude, I would like to say that we all agree that these carbon offsets projects vis-a-vis carbon credits is a quite problematic area that needs more literature and ways to see that indeed it fulfills its objective in addressing climate change and environmental justice as envisaged in the Paris Agreement of 2015. Thank you.
I think two questions were directed at me on funding. And I'd just like to say that in terms of the kind of work that you're talking about on carbon, that is work that is done in a very localized space. And there are actors in the country who deal with that. Because at the level that we work with countries to enable the creation of the rules of the game. And if you even look at the NRT, you will see that they are actually commercial contracts between the communities and actors who are local or abroad. So the long and short of that is that, of my point is, we do not fund that kind of work. Also, in terms of research, we really don't fund research for research's sake. Research is not our DNA. The work we do is helping member states and other actors create rules of the game. And in terms of the work that people do, the research we do, it feeds into people's research, and the research people do, we may also uptake it, but we don't have a mechanism for funding research.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presenters and the people who've done interventions and questions. And the question of carbon markets will keep coming up, so I think we need to think about it deeply as it's being implemented in Kenya. Now, we will break for a health break, and the discussions have taken a little longer than we thought, so we are requesting that we maintain 10 minutes. The venue is just outside, so we will walk. Okay, take a tea and then please come back. It's at 11:13, so by 11:30, we should be here exactly on time. Please, if we could...